Hello, thank you for joining me once again. Today I am continuing the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. Now we are on chapter 6, page 62 for those who have the book and would like to read along. That would be nice. I would appreciate that. Thank you for those who are listening, and please take the time to subscribe, like, and share. Comment about what you think this book is about, what you like about the book, all right? So without further ado, let's get to it. Chapter 6, Different Point of Views, Universal Consciousness, and Separate Consciousness. The concepts of universal consciousness and separate self-consciousness are central to the teachings of the Children of the Law of One, and they will be referred to throughout the book. So we'll start with the teachings about consciousness and go on from there. Almost every time I asked Zayn a deep question, he would also refer me to particular ancient texts to read in the library. He would say, read these first, meditate, then come speak with me again. When I first came to the monastery, I didn't really understand the meaning of universal consciousness. I certainly thought I did. I thought I understood it clearly. Sure, I had an intellectual grasp of some of it, but it was weak nonetheless. I eventually realized you could never really understand it until you finally experienced oneness with the universal spirit. In fact, you can't really fully understand much of anything until you achieve that. Yet, it may help many readers if I relate my earlier questions and answer sessions with Zayn. So from here on out, I will present many of the children's teachings in that format. It was the day of the new moon. I was on my way to my womb to meditate after a long, exhausting class. I turned a corner and standing there accidentally was Zayn. The course I was taking, and particularly this day's class, had left me with a nagging question about separate and universal consciousness, which I was going to try and understand better in my meditations. But it would have done me no good. I needed a little more change, a little more preparation before I would really grasp this concept. Peniel. Yes, Father? What troubles you? Nothing, Father. Everything is fine. Then why do I not feel that it is? Am I an idiot? Of course not, Father. I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time really understanding universal consciousness, or what the difference is between my own separate consciousness and that, or even what difference it makes. I mean, I am a decent person. No one has accused you otherwise, so what's your point? I guess it's that, so what if I have universal consciousness or not? As long as I'm a decent person. Because many people have been hurt by decent people, and decent people all over the world are suffering. The difference of who you are and what you do with universal consciousness is as day and night. That is why when you finally realize universal consciousness, that is when it finally is what you have achieved. It is called enlightenment or illumination. It is as if a light switch has been turned on in a life that has been lived in total darkness. Give me your notepad. I will write a text I want you to look up in the library. Read it, meditate it, then come see me in my chamber. I went to the library and told Gabriel the name of the text Zayn had written. He retrieved a scroll, placed it on the table, and unrolled it to the quote. It was in the place in the text that I was told to read. There, hand inscribed in alchemical ink, were these words: "Those who know not that they are one, act not as one. Those who act not as one create not love, but suffering and disharmony. What you create, you receive. The fruits of your acts will follow your days." Separate consciousness. After meditating for an hour, I went to Zain's chamber. He looked me piercingly in the eyes as usual and said, "It may be easier for you to understand universal consciousness if you first understand separate consciousness. Then you will at least understand what universal consciousness is not. And you will be able to relate more and understand separate consciousness, because that is what you have right now. Let's begin with one of the fundamental effects of separate consciousness, a person's individual, separate point of view. Point of view. We've all heard phrases like, "from where I sit," or "walk a mile in my shoes," etc. These are all common references to the significance of having separate and different points of view. A person's point of view can mean two things. Number one, it can mean what it literally says, the point from which a person sees things. And number two, it can mean a person's opinion. A person's opinion is based on a combination of, number one, and the person's programmed beliefs. Let's first look closer at number one, the point aspect. More individuals have a limited point or view dictated by the very fact that they are separate individuals. They are each seeing things from a different place, a different point, literally. And they see only from their separate individual place. There are as many places that a person will see from as there are persons. And the trouble is, seeing from only one place doesn't allow seeing a whole picture or a big picture. The metaphorical car of life. Here's a mediocre allegory that will help illustrate the point using a modern frame of reference you are familiar with. Let's say there is a classic car in a parking lot. The car is badly damaged on one side, but looks like new on the other. Two people going through the parking lot walk by the car, one on each side. One person's point of view is from the bad side, one from the good. As they walk by, they each see the car, make a judgment, and form clear, solid beliefs about the condition of the car. Because of their limited points of view, they are each left with totally different beliefs about the car. And each person's belief opposes and contradicts the others. One believes that the car is impeccable classic condition and very valuable. The other person, the car is in such bad shape, they couldn't even tell it was a classic. It just looks like an old junk car to them. And that's what that person believes the car is, an old junker. They are both right from their point of view. Yet, if you could see the entire car from above, author's note, see illustration. This is the illustration. See the car? One side is smooth, the other is rigid. This is the above point of view. Okay? Author's note, see illustration. From our point of view, they are both totally right and both totally wrong. How can they both be right when each point of view would seem to make the other wrong or impossible to be true? And how can they both be wrong when they are obviously both right from their point of view? The fact is that when you simultaneously grasp the two contradictory yet true beliefs, you actually have the greater truth about the car. This predicament of having two truths, each of which seem to make it impossible for the other to be true, is a crude sort of paradox. And the paradox is the closest thing you can get to real truth, or whole truth. On the earth plane, explained elsewhere in the book, this example shows us how we can see the whole truth if we get above and beyond each individual's points of view. Only then can we see the whole picture. From our lofty point of view, above the illustration, we have the combined points of view and can see that while the car is a classic, it would need a lot of work to put it in show condition. And while we see the damage, we also see that it's a classic, not just some piece of junk to have it hauled away. Greater points of view. Zayn went on. This example, of course, is not one of even seeing things with universal consciousness, seen from a universally broad point of view. But as the damaged car allegory demonstrates, in a small way, having a point of view that is as broad as possible allows us to better perceive reality, to see more truth. A broad point of view can help us better understand others, better understand the world, and ultimately the entire universe around us. If our point of view is broad enough, it lets us better understand other points of view. Then we can more easily communicate or interact with others, and they can more easily communicate with us. For instance, just like the people viewing that car, the point of view of each individual reading the ancient text or any book is going to be different. Thus, they will perceive it many different ways. Thus, it will be perceived differently than it really is, and differently than it was intended to be perceived. So when I write the book revealing the oral traditions of the children, it will not be perceived correctly either. True, the broader the reader's point of view, the more they will perceive what is really written within limits, but still, it will affect the subconscious and the inner being in each reader. And it may affect the consciousness of those with fertile ground for the seeds. Yet, it goes both ways. The broadest point of view. When we talk about the state of a person's consciousness, we are essentially talking about the state of their awareness of the world around them. And as such, a person's consciousness is directly related to the way they view, interpret, understand, and interact with everyone and everything around them. Excuse me. A person's point of view is affected by both the state of their consciousness and their beliefs and programming. Beliefs and programming are usually in sync with a person's level of consciousness. However, consciousness is dominant, and if there is a shift to a higher or lower state, the new consciousness can alter and override a person's belief and programming in order to match the new level of consciousness. I'm sorry, Father, some of this still escapes me. I understand, but a day will come when you will remember the words and fully understand. Please explain more about separate consciousness so I can understand it better. Separate self-consciousness. Every human being is obviously an individual self, and most people are both conscious that they are an individual self and believe that their individual self is separate from other people and everything else in the universe. Thus, people generally have separate self-consciousness and live their lives based on this consciousness. So, it is self-consciousness that creates the separate consciousness? Yes. Yes, in regards to a point of view. Having separate self-consciousness means having a point of view that is limited to seeing things from only one place. The place where the separate self is at. This can mean seeing things from an actual physical point of view that is limited to just the place where the person is located, such as in the car allegory. Or it can also mean seeing things from a point of view that's limited by the person's beliefs and programming. In any case, the point of view is very limited and the perspective is narrow. When a person has separate self-consciousness, there are varying degrees of narrow-mindedness, of course, but even the most broad point of view that comes from just one person with separate self-consciousness must be limited and incomplete because it is a view that is still only from one place, only from that one separate self. Thus, it is a point of view that will have a limited understanding. And if a person has such limited understanding, what kind of thoughts are they limited to? And if their thoughts are from such limited perception and understanding, what kind of action will they take regarding other people and the world around them? For the answer to that, just look around at the world. Do you mean that this creates problems in the world? All problems spring forth from this. How? Separate self-consciousness, because of its limitations and narrow-mindedness, boxes its perceptions into the world into pieces that are extensions of itself. Everything in your immediate world becomes an extension of you, of your separate self. For instance, there is your neighborhood, your town, or country. We start that again. For instance, there is your neighborhood, your town, your county, your state, your country, your part of the world, and depending on your socioeconomic status, probably your gang's turf. Because the separate self relates to these extensions of itself, most people support their country, for instance, just because it is their country. Sure, they come up with reasons why their country is the best or most important, but the problem is many people believe that their country is it, the best, and the most important, the most right, regardless of any reason to think so or not. And by doing so, they care less about other countries and the people of those other countries. And if everyone's country is the best, who's right? They can't all be right. This phenomenon is even worse when it comes to a person's outlook about their religion. Many people think theirs is the only right religion, and thus the only one that will provide salvation for anyone else. And many of these people actually hate other religions and their practices. When there is more than one religion claiming to be the only right one, it creates a question of who's right and who's wrong, and the dilemma of choosing the right one or facing the consequences of having chosen the wrong one, not getting into heaven, going to hell, etc. But getting back to the idea of everyone thinking their country is the best, consider this. What country ever went into battle without God on their side? In World War II, all sides believed God was on their side, including the Nazis. What country starts a war thinking that they're in the wrong? All of these perceptions and beliefs originate from separate selves and the territories they consider extensions of themselves. Most everyone favors not just their country, but all the extensions of their separate selves. They favor their race, favor their ethnic group, favor their school, favor their local team, favor their political party, etc., etc. But a precious few people have begun to expand their self-consciousness to include bigger pictures. Take, for example, those who have become so environmentally conscious that they are environmentally active. Those who have achieved that understand the importance of the flow and balance of nature on Earth. They know that saving whales in forests or seemingly insignificant things such as tiny birds, fish, or ferns can seriously alter life in ways that most people don't even suspect. Many of those who are truly environmentally conscious have transcended some of their separate consciousness and thus some of their self-centeredness and selfishness. Thus, perceiving the integrity of the environment is more important to them than many of the conveniences or inconveniences, recycling, power usages, etc., etc., involved. There is a story about a mountain man from the United States named Grizzly Adams that relates to this. When a beaver dammed the creek next to his cabin, threatening to flood his cabin, he moved and built a new cabin rather than disturb the beaver's dam. Talk about inconvenience. And believe it or not, this was still limited consciousness. But what a wonderful expansion of consciousness. To have reverence for all life and also be able to see the importance and potential effects of lives of whales and tiny fish and seemingly insignificant fern is higher consciousness. But it still falls short. It still falls far short of universal consciousness, and the efforts of such people can be a total waste of time or even harmful without it. He looked down solemnly and paused for a moment. He looked sad, and his feelings of sadness brought to mind my own consciousness and something that had shocked me, my sensibilities, a few years earlier. So I shared it with him. The human race barely cares about people, let alone plants and animals. I remember once seeing a breaking news story about 600,000 people who died in an earthquake. It was in the LA Times. You would expect such a disaster to be on the front page and be a long article. But it was only one small paragraph, about 40 words, buried on page 9. And the only reason why was because the quake was in China. Even then, I was shocked. Can you imagine how this article would have been treated if 600,000 French people had died? English? American? Of course, this was during a time when the U.S. was an enemy of China. The story now would be bigger news, at least, if for no other reason than because there would be 600,000 less Chinese consumers of American products. Unfortunately, son, but true. And those with separate self-consciousness will defend their views with twisted logic. Some people will say, so what if I think my country is the most important? It's good to have national pride. It doesn't change anything about any other country. It just helps this one be better. If you don't think that such an attitude has no effect on other countries, consider the atrocities that one country will often inflict on another. Or that a country will stand by and allow to happen to the citizens of one country, but not in another. Imagine invading soldiers regularly using bayonets to cut babies out of the wombs of 9-month pregnant women in the street for purposes of genocide. That happens. But as long as it only happens in countries that other countries don't care about, no one cares. As things are, such things are nearly never reported in the news media of the world. What if it was going on in Chicago, England, France, Mexico? Do you think we would not even be hearing about it? If all the churches in Britain were being destroyed by invading armies and the priests tortured, would it not get on the news? It would not only get on the news, but many countries would send troops over there to stop it in an instant. How's that for national pride? What national pride? It all depends on what our separate selves consider extensions or relations of themselves or have selfish stake in. Some people have begun to transcend pride of country. Again, this is good, but it does not go far enough. So few have a truly global feeling of family, but there are some who do. But even environmental and humanitarian consciousness is still limited, and a person could accidentally cause terrible disasters acting from limited perceptions, even if their own intention was only to help. All these expansions of consciousness are steps towards the ultimate expansive and caring consciousness, universal consciousness. But they are still all variations of separate self-consciousness, limited by so many constraints and ultimately mistake-ridden and destructive. Oh, how many tears have been shed in the wake of things gone wrong. And the cry is echoed, but I was only trying to help. The fact is, all things in the universe are essentially made of the same stuff and are totally interdependent and connected. So we cannot be truly separate from the rest of the universe. We can only be a part of it all. But we can think we are separate. We can believe we are separate. And then we act like we are separate. Having separate self-consciousness doesn't mean you are really separate, but it does mean having a total illusion of separateness from everyone and everything else in the universe. And when a person truly believes they are separate, they naturally focus on themselves. And when someone believes they are separate and they focus their attention and their energy on their self, this naturally leads to selfishness. This is very important, my son. Pay close attention. This is the big issue, the big problem of all problems, the only real problem. As silly and simple as it sounds, it is serious. Simple selfishness is the root of all problems and evils that exist on earth. This is one of the greatest, most important teachings to understand. So say it back to me. Selfishness is the root of all problems and evils that exist on earth. Okay, selfishness is the root of all problems and evils that exist on earth. Good. And again, how does this selfishness come to existence? Where there is such separate consciousness as humans have, everyone perceives everyone else in an us and them and a me against the world fashion. When this occurs, which it naturally must with separateness, there will naturally be attempts to get or take from others and keep others from getting what you have. It is perfectly natural and, in its own warped way, logical. And where does it all leave us? Where there is separateness and selfishness, there will be strife, discord, injustice, taking from others, harm to other beings, creatures, the environment, etc., etc. So when someone says something about the problems of the world being from political parties or greed or money or war or lust or vanity or carelessness or whatever, what do you say? That they are only branches. The root of all problems, all evils, all sufferings is selfishness. And why is there selfishness and thus all these evils? Because it is the natural outcome of separate self-consciousness, of thinking you are separate from the universe and thus all things in existence. And so, what is the only cure for evil, suffering, and all problems? Losing separate consciousness and selfishness by regaining consciousness of our oneness with everything. Universal consciousness. And how can one regain universal consciousness? Through unselfish love, self-sacrifice, caring, giving, seeing the illusion of self-consciousness that we carry with us in our mind and breaking them. Please don't let the teachings that promote oneness be understood as promoting a one world religion or government, where oneness and peace are enforced by human rule or dogma. Nothing could be further from what we mean to convey. We are first of all proponents of freedom and free will. I'm talking about an internal way of being, a consciousness that includes sensitivity, compassion, and freedom, and caring about all people, creatures, all creation, as much as you do about yourself. Are you saying all governments are bad? No, just incomplete. And that they won't ever solve all problems or work properly unless people themselves change inside. Certainly, some governments are just formed to wield power for an elite group over the people. But sometimes governments are formed to administer and ensure justice between all the separate beings it controls. But no form of government can really work or last when separate consciousness exists. Why? Excuse me. Because the people running the government have the same separate consciousness. And when they get power, you see the worst of selfishness. And they can appeal to the selfishness in the populace. Read that. Because the people running the government have the same separate consciousness. And when they get power, you see the worst of selfishness. And they can appeal to the selfishness in the populace to get what they want. When you stop and think about these things, it is easier to understand why the children teach that only when all people have universal consciousness and everyone is primarily governed from within by the universal spirit will there ever be peace and harmony and freedom from tyranny on earth. Why did you say it that way, on earth? Because there is so much more, and the earth is just one speck of dust within an incredibly larger scheme of things. Outside of the earth, the entire universe functions in a beautiful, orderly, harmonious flow. On earth, humans with separate self-consciousness are the only things that are out of step with the flow of nature and the universe. And the results of this have been disharmony, disruption, and destruction. That's why the teachings of the children of the law of one promote the attainment of universal consciousness by any means that works for you. We will cover the children's teachings about how humans attain separate self-consciousness in the ancient history chapter, and the particulars of each individual's selfish separate self later in a separate chapter. But first, let's go over the meaning of universal consciousness. Universal consciousness. Please tell me more of the teachings on universal consciousness, enlightenment, and its attainment. Universal consciousness is attained when a person has a lasting experience in which they see through their illusion of separateness and lose their separate self-consciousness. Through their consciousness then merges with the universe. Thus, they experience being one with the universe. This is often the result of going through a conscious psychological death experience brought on by meditation or other aspects of a spiritual path. Author's note: these are explained in another chapter. The illusion of separateness dissolves in the awareness of oneness, and with the dissolution of the illusion of separateness, the separate self seems to die, and a rebirth occurs. Separate self-consciousness is transcended and transformed. The dominant consciousness becomes that of the inner self, the part of us that is the universal spirit. Thus, we have universal consciousness. When experienced properly, a person is never the same, never sees things the same way again. From then on, all things are understood in the light of the biggest picture, in the light of being one with the universal spirit. God. Selfishness thus becomes a thing of the past. This is also called achieving enlightenment, and a few other names. The differences between having separate self-consciousness or having universal consciousness is, as I said before, like day and night. Consider again an environmentalist who has expanded his or hers separate self-consciousness to include concern for ecology. This is good. And if being aware of the flow and balance of the Earth's nature is good, imagine the significance of being really aware of the flow and balance of all things, of the entire universe. And if being concerned about all humans on Earth is good, what about being devoted to caring for all life within the entire universe? A person who has attained universal consciousness has transcended separate self-consciousness and thus sees infinitely more, understands infinitely more. Imagine being able to see the outcome of many of your actions in advance, or whether or not you see the outcome, being able to know if what you are doing is really good to ultimately help or ultimately harm. Or using the classic car allegory again, imagine seeing one side of the car, not assuming that the other side is the same. How would you like to be able to sense what all sides were like? That would be incredible, Father. Yes, that is just a small nothing. What if you really had an awareness of being one with everything, even God, even all other separate selves? How would you see things then? And how would you treat everyone and everything? If you absolutely know that every person you are dealing with is you, just in a different form, how will you treat yourself, others? Is there any point to stealing from yourself, hurting yourself? Is there any point in being tyrannical with yourself? It would make no sense. There would be no point if you really believe that to be true. Precisely. A being with universal consciousness loves everyone unselfishly and is within the needs of universal flow. Giving, kind, compassionate, caring, knowing, and harmlessness. That doesn't mean incapable of defending the innocent. Why? Why? Is it because the person has read something that made them that way? Studied to be that way? Trained to be that way? No. Maybe such things were stepping stones on the path towards attainment of that consciousness. But once there, the fact is that being any other way simply makes no sense to someone with universal consciousness. It just is their reality. It is just natural. It is similar with people at any level of consciousness. A basically decent person is not just trying to be basically decent, moral, or law-abiding. It comes somewhat naturally depending on what they have made of themselves throughout their lifetimes. And they can and will digress towards greater selfishness given the right situation. Everyone just manifests the level of their consciousness. And for most, it moves in a certain range, wavering between selfishness and unselfishness to varying degrees, and shifts at different times in their lives. and depending on their circumstances, they are subject to. It is as natural for a person with universal consciousness to be totally giving as it is for a person with separate self-consciousness to be selfish. A person with separate self-consciousness is focused inward, and thus they are like an energy vacuum, a black hole, always trying to get energy. But a person with universal consciousness is focused outward, and thus they are like an energy beacon, a sun, always given energy. So, piercing this illusion of separateness and attaining universal consciousness is the answer to the entire world's problem. Let me reread that. So, piercing this illusion of separation and attaining universal consciousness is the answer to the entire world's problems. If everyone had universal consciousness, there would be no need for the kind of governments we have now, for all would be governed as one from within themselves. Just imagine a world in which everyone is conscientious of caring and responsible, and where such behavior is not coerced by threat of prison or death, or even convincing of any kind. No need for religions to try and influence people to behave morally. No need for police, armies, governments, etc. Because unselfish love and service to universal will is all fixed within every being. What paradise! We may never achieve this on earth. Then again, we may. But there are planes of existence other than the physical plane on earth into which only universal conscious beings can enter. Paradise does already exist. Personal changes. There are also major personal psychological changes that come from attaining universal consciousness. The seriousness and significance of things that you once considered very important will change. How important such and such is will now be viewed in a much greater light, and its true importance determined there. Things that previously may have upset you or been desirable to you may lose their impact because they pale in significance when seen within the context of awareness of all things. For instance, how can the paper boy throwing the paper behind the bushes upset you very much when you are truly and constantly in mental touch with such things as the starvation going on in the world? The fact that other species just became extinct while you were reading the headlines, the vision of what will happen when the poles shift, what life is like when you have the consciousness of lava on Saturn, and on and on and on. Also, with such a radical consciousness change, some things that you may have previously taken for granted or that you found enjoyable can change dramatically as far as how you experienced them. For instance, how can a football game be very interesting when competition is senseless to you because you know we are all one? You know we are God. And worse, you know the game is actually reinforcing separateness and hostility. All you see from your universal viewpoint is a bunch of we who don't understand who we are, attacking themselves so some we can win and feel superior, and some we can lose and feel terrible. What do you mean by these things that were taken for granted change also? Take those beautiful flowers growing over there. You think nothing of them other than they are pretty. When I look at them, I know they may never bloom again. They could become diseased. They may go extinct. I may go blind. I appreciate them so much more because I am aware of these things. And when I don't see them anymore or they die, I don't laminate them because I know they are living on elsewhere because all life lives on. It's a paradox. When you have universal consciousness, you take everything much more seriously and not seriously at all. Nothing can ever really be destroyed or created. It can only change form, for all is one. Take you for another example. I love you. I truly am aware of every moment that I may never see you again on earth. You may die tonight. I may have a stroke when I leave this room and be unable to communicate or even grasp your hand. So I appreciate you so much more, life so much more, and I cherish our being here right now. And thus I behave differently. If I were to fight with you and say unkind things or hurt you in any way, I know I may never get a chance to make amends or even apologize. And that would be the way we ended our relationship here and now. Even if I wasn't aware that we are a part of each other and you just aren't really aware of that, I couldn't do anything hurtful either because I know this is it. This may be our last chance to be together in this way for a long time. At the same time, it doesn't matter because we are all just the one, interacting, changing form, coming in, and going out. The only thing that does matter really is that those of you who think and believe and live as separate are suffering. Suffering needlessly. And I feel for you and I want to help you. That is all I am really here for. I think I understand, but how can we really know all these things and see all these paradoxical things? How can we keep them in our consciousness and be aware of them at the same time and constantly all the time? Guidance from above. It just happens when your separate self gives up its illusion, surrenders its artificially self-created life, and there are degrees of this. The closer you get to attaining universal consciousness, the greater your point of view will become, and the more you will intuitively see the whole picture or whole situation. The attainment of universal consciousness is quite dramatic, though, and you can't help but to see all things and be aware of them. But while a person who has attained universal consciousness may see the whole picture to the greatest extent possible on earth, even they don't see it all while still embodied. A completely all-encompassing point of view is not really possible while functioning in a physical body. We can achieve this in deep meditation, but when we again return to full physical plane function, we can only grasp the essence of what we understood in our ultimate point of view state. That is why the children teach that getting out of your own way and allowing ourselves to be an instrument of the universal spirit, God, is the greatest wisdom. This too is achieved simultaneously with universal consciousness. It comes with the package. When we have thus become an instrument of the universal spirit, we are then always watched over by our ascended hierarchical kin, the guided when necessary. This is not actually mediumship or channeling. Editor's note, see the teachings on channeling in the teacher-student chapter. It is still having only your own inner being in charge of or in possession of our body and consciousness. So how are we guided? Our inner being is one with the universal spirit. And when we allow it to come out and take control of us, we become an active link in the hierarchical chain of universally conscious beings. As a part of the chain, we are both led by the movement of the entire chain, and we become the chain. While we are still earthbound and fettered by the limitations of the physical plane, others of our chain, our hierarchical superiors, are not so limited. They too unselfishly care for all life, but they are in a higher state of consciousness, oneness with the universe, than we are on earth, and have an infinite view. And as one, we can receive guidance from these other parts of our chain, these beautiful beings who have unfettered, all-encompassing point of view. They always know what is best, even if it does not seem so to us from our narrow point of view. We are, though, for now. This has been an exhausting session. I must rest. Thank you, Father. May you rest well. Okay, that was chapter 6 of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like this video, make a comment, share what you've learned, conversate with others, and please join me again in the reading of chapter 7, and that will be on page 73 for those who have the book, okay? So until then, have the most benevolent day.